How's it going, everybody? In this video, I'm going to be talking about Walden by Henry David Thoreau and what you can kind of take out of that book and apply to your own life. So, Walden is best for those who are interested in classics, those who really are interested in nature, and those who are also interested in minimalism or kind of living off the grid. The difficulty to digest for Walden is pretty easy in terms of being able to kind of like read through the sentences and understand what's being shared. One of the harder parts is the narrative coherence, right? It kind of jumps around all over the place, and there are technically chapters, but it's still not super well organized. So there are interesting ideas in there, but they are spread out in a way that's a little bit incoherent or jumps around a lot. All right, key insights. So Walden is pretty much about Thoreau's adventure out into the wilderness to live for a couple of years using the absolute bare minimum amount of things, and it's kind of the documenting of that journey as well as sort of his insights into what living in that way is like and what it's like to kind of observe other people from the outside a little bit, and some of these sorts of topics that come up related to minimalism and kind of living off the land or living as close to off the land and off the grid as you can. There's also a good mix of kind of personal stories in there, historical references, some philosophical musings. There's a lot of varied types of content, and as I mentioned before, it can make it kind of hard to follow at times. But at the same time, it covers a lot of ground, and you can feel, it's very much an authentic and raw re-recording of his experience, and it's translated that way. So for this video, I'm going to focus a little bit more on things that are directly applicable, because there's a lot of stuff in here that is sort of flowery or interesting, but it's not really stuff that you can use in your life. It's not really stuff that's going to help you. Like, for example, there are these really long sections about accounting for certain things, and it's like, beans cost this much, and I did this, and I bought some planks, and it cost this much, and that's not going to serve you well, right? At the time, I'm sure it was useful, but it doesn't have a lot of applicability now. So I will focus on kind of the main themes that have come out throughout the book that you can use for yourself. Now, the book itself is a little bit more opinionated than I'm going to be, so I'll try to kind of pepper that in there, but just know that some of the sections are a little bit stronger or more pointed than what I'm going to share. All right, so one of the big themes in Walden is living simply, right? And it's this idea that many people are working so hard that at a certain point, they are not really getting any benefit from it, right? Like some of the things that he says are, you work so hard to just have a bigger box, which is true in a lot of cases, right? A lot of people are working extremely hard to just have a slightly bigger house when a smaller house would suit them just fine, and they don't need to put in all that extra effort. So these are some of the important questions that bubble up. Do these sorts of luxuries that everyone seems to want actually add to quality of life? Thoreau's going to say no. For the most part, it doesn't. And, I'm inclined to agree, right? There are a lot of things that on the surface seem like they're going to make your life much better. However, when you actually get down to the core pieces of your life that account for most of the quality, it's only a handful of things. And you don't need to push for this all super high luxury stuff because it doesn't add anything to quality of life. So on this sort of note, Thoreau spends a lot of his time in what I would just call, free time, quality free time, just doing things like enjoying nature or kind of musing through things or interacting with people or doing the things that really do add to quality of life. And that's kind of the position he takes here, is that, you can work your whole life for these things, but at what point is it no longer worth it? Another major theme kind of following along is the value of knowledge, and Thoreau speaks at length about how knowledge is valuable in just a number of realms. And by that, he means, sort of this more long-lasting knowledge or more applicable things. Like he explicitly says news is not a worthy use of time because it just kind of flutters in and out. And once you've heard, one story, you kind of get the idea. So he's really talking about these things like pieces of information that are going to serve you well in the long term. He mentions kind of the classics and reading them in their own language and basically developing wisdom. He also mentions that, as people gain wealth and they realize that it's not really adding to their quality of life, what a lot of people end up desiring is wisdom. And what they want is actually information and knowledge. So that's sort of one of the angles taken here, is that just having this this knowledge and investing time in building knowledge is going to be really valuable for quality of life. This includes kind of self-knowledge, right? Reflection and taking the time to kind of hone in on what your attributes are and how different things affect you and whatnot. And Thoreau mentions that not a lot of people do this naturally, and not many people are reading and spending a lot of time on this kind of stuff. But these are the things that vastly improve quality of life. Another major theme that comes out of this book is connection. And a lot of this text is basically about Thoreau going out to Walden and finding connection with nature himself, and the people around him that he comes in contact with. The idea that you may hear is that he kind of went out and isolated and lived off the grid and whatever, but in the actual book, there's a lot of instances of him running into people running into him going into town. So there is still a social element. He's just not, right in the center of town, working himself to death and trying to keep up with everything else. It's a much different style and pace of life. And the book is really a lot about connection. Now, Thoreau takes a strong opinion throughout the book of like, well, you need to be out in nature and do the most natural version of things, and that's sort of his angle. I don't think that actually applies completely, right? Because people are different. They connect to the world and themselves and others in different ways, and some people may want to just be out in nature and that really works for them all the time, and others may want less of that, or just to sort of change up the variables. So I think that's a more useful frame, but the core idea of having a places of connection, ways to connect to the world is really important, and that is one of the major themes that comes out in this book. One of the last major themes is basically that there is a lot of value in experimenting with life. If you just sort of sit in the same routines, you can get stuck. Things can feel a little bit bland and boring. Years can go by where nothing is really happening. So Thoreau argues that we should kind of do experiments and change up our life and try new things to really experience, the widest range of what life has to offer. And that's kind of what Walden is an experiment for him for a couple years of, okay, if I go out and live in the woods and I don't have much stuff, then how does that feel and how does that make me feel and all that other stuff. But he, in the end, says he's moving on. He does other stuff. So, it's not just about like, okay, this is the perfect way to live, right? It's about part of life is this experimentation and exploration process so that you can really get a good breadth of experience and knowledge about the world and the experiences it has to offer. So, final opinion. Walden is considered a classic, and there is a lot of really cool, interesting stuff in there. But as far as concrete tools to improve your life, there's probably going to be better resources for you. There's better things you can pick that are going to be more applicable. They're going to be less airy. They're going to kind of ramble less, right? There's a lot of stuff in here that is interesting or relevant to the time period, but is not going to give you, fresh ideas for, okay, this is how I'm going to start living. So I would really only recommend it for people who want to read it as, the classic that it is, but not for those who are thinking, okay, this is going to give me the keys to unlock well-being, because there's been a lot of research that's come out since this book that can find different points to argue with and whatnot. The real value here is in some of the really nice language. And if you really like nature writing, there's a ton of nature writing. There are very long expositions about, the ways that certain animals are interacting or how the pond freezes over, all these things that are really interesting. And it's kind of nice to listen to if you like that kind of thing. But again, it's not going to give you steps for substantially increasing well-being. Other considerations. So one thing is I almost gave up on this book a couple times. There are a number of really long expositions on like daily living, accounting, home building, things that for me are not particularly entertaining. And the level of detail was so high that it just would drag on and on. It was hard for me. That doesn't mean you shouldn't consider it. That's just one piece of the puzzle. Another consideration, I mentioned this a few times, but there are several kind of expository pieces talking about other people's lives and what they're like and how they are. And I don't think it really gives the full weight to kind of the individual experience that everyone else has and sort of the ideas and dreams and values and whatnot that other people are doing. He takes some strong opinions on how people should live and what they should do. And I just don't think that it's generalizable to the entire population, right? For example, he's saying we really need to spend a ton of time in nature to be happy. And that may be different for people because he was okay with a lot of time alone, right? Other people may need more social interaction to have a good life. Another thing he talked about was having like an extremely simple diet, eating the same stuff over and over and over again. Some people may find a lot of value in having novelty in their food. So some of the positions are just a little bit hard to take completely seriously or take to their root because there is variability. Now, there are some really interesting and great observations about people. It's just that they're mixed in with some of these other things that make you pause for a moment and think like, I don't know if that's true. The last consideration is, there's a couple references to God, there's some outdated language, there's some perspectives that don't hold up super well in the current time period. Those are few and far between, and for the most part, it's pretty respectful. But just a heads up, if you're sensitive to that kind of information, there are a few instances where those sorts of things crop up. On to the applicable content. So, 1, how can you simplify your life? 2, how are you deepening your self-knowledge on a regular basis? So that wraps up what I've got for Walden. Again, really only recommend it if you want to read a classic. If you're trying to improve well-being and whatnot, there's a lot of better resources for you to pick up that are more modern and going to be more targeted. That's all I've got for this video. As always, if you have any questions, comments, topics you want me to cover, throw them down in the box below. I'll get to them as soon as I can, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please take a second to subscribe, as it really helps out a lot. If you're looking for more content, there's all sorts of information over at howtohappy.com, and if you want something a little bit more condensed and concise, I've also written the book Mindscaping, which is essentially a framework for optimizing happiness. So we'll have the link there as well, and that's all I've got. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.